Howdy folks, today we are going to look at the file system module in Node, the file system module is one of the built-in modules that Node provides to us, and we can use it for reading and writing files, which is often a very important thing to do. Let's get into it. So, the first thing that we need to do is we need to import the appropriate module. So to do that, we are going to use const fs equals require fs. Note, we didn't have to install this. If I look at my package.json, I don't have it in the dependencies. That's because fs is an internal module. It's a first-party module to Node, and so you don't have to install it. You just get it by installing Node. Again, I've declared my variable with the same name as the module. This is common. You don't have to do this. I could call this file system, for instance, but it's just easier to call it fs because then you know what it is. So the first thing we want to do is read from a file. I've got my input.txt right here. It has some string in it, hello world. So how do we do that? fs dot read file. Okay. Then you want the file path. In this case, it's just going to be input.txt. And then the encoding of the file. Generally, in most cases, you're going to use UTF-8. So, you might be wondering, what does UTF-8 stands for? It stands for Unicode Text Format. And that is meant to be a universal encoding. It handles most languages. There's UTF-8, UTF-16. Generally, your files are UTF-8, so you don't need to worry about it too much. This is a good standard to use when reading a file. The third thing you need is a callback function. And what will that callback function take? Well, its parameter is going to be the actual content of your file. So let's console log that content. And we run this. Oh, we get null. That's because I got this wrong. The first thing is actually an error state, and then the second is the content. So you might wonder, why is there an error state? There we go. There's our content. Well, let's say file doesn't exist. Now I'm going to get an error. No such file or directory, and undefined is the content. So you kind of want to check that error. So if error, and then return. Otherwise, we can make use of our content. And so you could see if there's an error, if there's an issue, the content doesn't exist. So in this case, I'm just logging the error. In the case it does work, I'm logging the content. So a good thing to keep in mind. You notice I forgot it because I'm not used to that format, but it is something you have to remember when you're dealing with this. So now we've got our data. If it's JSON, you may need to parse it into an object because it's always a string by default. So now let's say we want to write it back to our file, but duplicate it. Okay, so let's say new content equals my message is content. So it just takes the content of the original input file, puts it in 3 times, just like that. Well, there's also fs.write file. And it has kind of a similar thing where it wants a file. So let's put output.txt. It takes the content, and then it also takes a callback. Why callback? Well, it also gets an error. Why would you get an error when writing a file? Well, perhaps you don't have permissions to write a file. Maybe your hard drive is full and it can't write a file. There's a couple reasons why that might happen. In any case, the same error handling code can go in there. And then we're just going to console log wrote file. Now, what we've got here, we're reading a file into our callback, checking it for errors, building a new content string, writing that to a file, which has another callback that we have errors. Generally, you want to wait till this callback is done to assume that your file has been written. Run that, wrote file, and now you can see output.txt. We take a look at that, and it's got our new string. Basically, that's kind of all there is to it for file I/O. This is the very basics of what you're going to need: read file, write file. So now let's talk about a couple other things. let's say that every time I want to run this, I don't want to overwrite my file. Like maybe if I say my new messages and I write this, it completely overwrites that file. If I don't want that, I can actually use append file. Now, what does append file do? If the output doesn't exist, so if I delete this, it behaves very similar to write file. It just creates a new file, puts the data in it. But let's say I run it again. Now it's actually appended that in there, and so it keeps the original content behind. You also notice that it's smashed up like that. If you want to fix that, you generally want a new line, so then I would actually put a /n. /n is just the new line. So when I hit enter now, you can see now it's started off with that new line like that. Change this here. Universe. Look at output. Now it's changed hello universe. So that's append file. These particular systems with their callbacks, sometimes it's kind of annoying to do a callback. You don't always want a callback, right? So that's why we have read file sync. Now read file sync doesn't take a callback. What it does is it actually just returns the content like that. So then I can do this. And it's called synchronous because it's not using a callback, it's not an asynchronous function, but oops. You can see if I run it, it does the same thing, it's still reading fine. Append file and write file also have sync varieties, and in that case they don't have a callback. So if I change this to append file sync, you can see it still works just as well. You might wonder though, what if I put an error here? What if I made a mistake? Well, in that case it actually throws an error. So you can wrap that in a try catch block if you want. Oops. There was, let's just log error reading file. So yeah, that's basically it. If you're using the, you can see now, if you're using the asynchronous version, then it will give you the error as a parameter to the callback. If you're using the synchronous version, it's actually going to throw that error, so you need to put a try catch around it. And that's really it. There are a couple other small things that you might want to do with file I/O, but this is 90% of what you're going to be doing. Reading and writing or appending. I tend to use the sync functions all the time just because it makes the code look cleaner, but using the non-synchronous functions are fine. Just remember that you need to have the callback functions in there for that. So anyway, that's all for now. Hope that was interesting. I'll see you all next time.